A poor little black boy sees a billionaire's deaf daughter struggling to communicate. He walks up to her and does something impossible. The billionaire thought it was just a child's game, but what the boy revealed days later shattered his entire world. What's the biggest secret you've ever uncovered? Let us know in the comments and get ready for a story you won't forget. Julian Vance's world was built of glass and silence. From his penthouse office on the 92nd floor, he could orchestrate the movements of a global empire with the flick of a finger across a tablet. Vance Global was a monument to his ambition, a steel and chrome fortress against the chaos of the world. But inside the fortress, the silence was absolute. It was the silence of grief, a void carved into his life 6 years ago when his wife, Elena, had died giving birth to their daughter. And it was the silence of his daughter herself. Lily Vance, at 6 years old, was a perfect, heartbreaking echo of her mother. She had Elena's dark, tumbling curls and her impossibly deep brown eyes. But she had never heard her own name. She had never heard the lullabies Julian had tried to sing, his voice cracking in the sterile nursery. She had been born, the doctor said, profoundly deaf, a tragic random misfire in the delicate wiring of the inner ear. His life was a meticulously managed routine designed to contain this sprawling, silent grief. His sister, Eleanor, was the architect of that routine. She was his COO at Vance Global and the unwavering pillar of his personal life. "Don't worry, Julian," she'd say, her voice always a soothing balm of competence. "I'll handle it. You focus on the company. I'll make sure Lily has everything she needs." And she did. The best tutors, the finest specialists, a world curated to be safe and silent. Today, however, the routine was broken. Eleanor had insisted he take an afternoon for himself, for Lily. "She needs you, Julian, not the CEO, her father." The words were a familiar, gentle guilt trip. So here he was, in a private members-only park that felt as artificial as his own life, watching Lily chase a butterfly across a lawn so perfect it looked like a computer rendering. He sat on a bench, his custom-tailored suit feeling like a suit of armor, completely out of place among the laughing children and their casually dressed parents. He felt a million miles away from all of them, a king in a gilded cage watching life through soundproof glass. Lily stumbled and fell, her little hand skidding on the grass. She didn't cry out. She never did. She just looked at her palms, her expression one of mild surprise, before pushing herself back up. The sight sent a familiar pang through his chest, a mix of fierce pride and devastating sorrow. It was then that he saw the boy. He was sitting near an old oak tree at the edge of the manicured lawn, just outside the ornate iron fence that separated the private park from the public sidewalk. He was maybe a year older than Lily, with watchful, intelligent eyes and skin the color of rich coffee. He was watching Lily with an unnerving intensity. A woman, presumably his mother, sat on a public bench behind him, her face etched with a weariness Julian couldn't begin to comprehend. Julian's protective instincts flared. He was about to stand to call Lily back to the safety of his side when the boy slipped through a gap in the fence he hadn't even noticed. He walked directly toward Lily, his steps confident, not hesitant. Julian was on his feet in an instant, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "Hey!" The word came out harsher than he intended. The boy didn't even look at him. He stopped a few feet from Lily, who was now crouched down, examining a ladybug on a blade of grass. The boy's mother was up now, too, a look of alarm on her face. "Leo, no! Come back here!" But Leo ignored her. He knelt in front of Lily. Julian was about to stride forward and physically remove the child, but something made him pause. The boy wasn't speaking. He wasn't making wild gestures. He was just watching Lily's face. Then he did something strange. He began to hum. It was a low, resonant sound, almost a vibration. He slowly reached out a hand, not to touch her face or her arm, but he gently placed his fingertips on the bone behind her right ear. He tapped a soft, steady rhythm against her skull, his humming changing in pitch, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and then it happened. Lily, who had never reacted to a car horn, a slammed door, or her own father's shouted name, flinched. Her head snapped up. Her eyes, wide with a shocking alien emotion, darted around the park as if hearing it for the very first time. She looked at the boy, Leo, and her mouth fell open. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't a random vibration from the ground. Her reaction was specific, direct. It was a reaction to the boy. Julian's world, so carefully constructed, so rigidly controlled, tilted on its axis. The silence he had accepted as an immutable fact of his life was suddenly filled with a deafening question. The boy, Leo, pulled his hand back, a small, knowing smile on his face. He looked over at Julian, his gaze direct and profound. Then he turned and ran back through the fence to his mother, who quickly scolded him and hurried him away down the street. Julian stood frozen, his billion-dollar empire forgotten. He stared at his daughter, who was still looking around, her head cocked, a bewildered expression on her face. She had reacted. He had seen it. It was impossible, but it had happened. The glass walls of his life didn't just have a crack in them. They had been struck by a wrecking ball. And the name of that wrecking ball was Leo. His hunt for the truth had just begun. He couldn't shake the image of Lily's flinch. It played on a loop in his mind, a single frame of film that invalidated 6 years of medical certainty. When he and Lily returned to the sterile silence of the penthouse, Eleanor was waiting for them, a warm smile on her face. "How was it? Did you two have a good time?" she asked, kneeling down to sign "Welcome home" to Lily. Julian's throat was tight. Something happened at the park. He recounted the story, his voice flat, trying to deliver the facts without the seismic shock that was still reverberating through him. He described the boy, the humming, the tapping, and Lily's reaction. Eleanor listened patiently, her brow furrowed with concern. When he finished, she placed a comforting hand on his arm. "Julian, darling, you know how these things can be. It was probably just a vibration. Maybe he startled her. You're overtired. You've been pushing yourself too hard on this new merger." "It wasn't a vibration, Elle." I saw her face. She looked like she heard something. The words sounded insane, even to his own ears. "Sweetheart, the doctors have been very clear. Her auditory nerves never fully formed. It's a physical impossibility. You want it to be true so badly? We all do. But we can't torture ourselves with false hope." Her logic was impeccable. It was the same logic he had used to build his own prison of acceptance. But what he had seen defied logic. "I need to find that boy," he said, the decision solidifying into something hard and real in his chest. Eleanor's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "A strange child from the street? Julian, what for? To ask him what, exactly? How he performs miracles? Be realistic. It was a coincidence." "Maybe," Julian conceded, but his mind was already racing. He had resources, unlimited resources. Finding one boy in New York City was not a challenge. He pulled out his phone and made a call to a man he kept on retainer for problems that couldn't be solved in a boardroom. Marcus Thorne, a former intelligence operative who now ran the most discreet private security and investigation firm in the country. "Marcus," Julian said, his voice low, "I have a job for you. I need you to find a boy." Over the next 2 days, Julian was a ghost, haunting his own life. He sat in board meetings, staring at profit and loss projections, while seeing only a small boy's humming mouth. He reviewed acquisition proposals, his mind replaying the tap-tap-tap of fingers on his daughter's skull. He felt a frantic, obsessive energy he hadn't experienced since the early days of building his company. This was a puzzle, an anomaly, and his mind couldn't let it go. He started watching Lily with a new, desperate intensity. He clapped his hands behind her back. Nothing. He dropped a heavy book on the marble floor. not even a flicker. He felt a crushing wave of disappointment. Eleanor was right. He was losing his mind, chasing a ghost born of hope. But then small things began to surface. While she was coloring, a garbage truck backfired on the street, 92 floors below. It was a deep guttural roar, and Lily's crayon stopped moving for a fraction of a second. Her eyes lifted from the page, not with recognition, but with a faint, subliminal disturbance. He saw it. He was sure of it. He tried to replicate it, playing low-frequency sounds from his phone's speaker. Nothing. It was maddening. What was the key? What had that boy done? On the third day, Marcus called. "We found him. His name is Leo Carter, 7 years old. Lives with his mother, Maria Carter, in a 2-room apartment in the Bronx. She's a cleaner. Works 2 jobs. Barely scraping by. No criminal record. By all accounts, a good kid. Quiet. Smart." "Mabo, send me the address," Julian said, his heart hammering. "Mr. Vance, is there anything I should know? Is this a threat situation?" "No, Marcus. This is, personal." He told Eleanor he had a last-minute meeting downtown. The lie felt clumsy on his tongue. Deception was not his usual mode of operation. He preferred brutal, efficient honesty. But he knew she would try to stop him, to protect him from what she saw as an inevitable heartbreak. The drive to the Bronx was like traveling to another country. The gleaming steel towers of Manhattan gave way to brick tenements with peeling paint and fire escapes zigzagging down their faces. His driver navigated the unfamiliar streets with a nervous tension, the custom-made Rolls-Royce looking like a spaceship that had landed on a hostile planet. The building was even worse than he'd imagined. The lobby smelled of stale cabbage and bleach. He took the rattling elevator to the 5th floor and walked down a dimly lit hallway until he found apartment 5B. He could hear a television muttering from inside. He raised his hand to knock, but hesitated. What was he going to say? "My name is Julian Vance, and I believe your son has unlocked a medical impossibility in my deaf daughter." He felt the full weight of the absurdity of his mission. He was a man who dealt in data, in facts, in quantifiable results. And here he was, standing outside a stranger's door, chasing a feeling, chasing a ghost. He took a deep breath and knocked. The sound was loud in the narrow hall. The door opened a few inches, held by a chain. A woman's tired, suspicious eyes peered out at him. It was the woman from the park, Maria Carter. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice wary. "Mrs. Carter, my name is Julian Vance." He held up a business card. "My daughter. We were at the park the other day. Your son, Leo." Her eyes widened, first in recognition, then in fear. She tried to close the door. "We don't want any trouble." "Please," Julian said, his voice more desperate than he intended. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to ask him a question. It's about my daughter. It's important." "Leo didn't do anything wrong," she said, her hand trembling on the door. "I know. He did something amazing. Please, just 5 minutes." She stared at him, her gaze traveling over his $1,000 suit, his expensive watch, the sheer, alien wall of wealth he represented. He could see the conflict in her eyes, fear warring with a desperate curiosity. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, she slid the chain off the door. The apartment was tiny, but immaculately clean. Leo was sitting on the floor, doing homework at a small coffee table. He looked up as Julian entered, his expression not of surprise, but of calm expectation, as if he'd been waiting for him. "Mr. Vance," Maria said, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "What is this about?" Julian knelt down so he was on eye level with Leo. The boy didn't flinch. His gaze was steady, ancient. "Leo," Julian began, his voice surprisingly soft, "what you did at the park, for my daughter, Lily. How did you know to do that?" Leo looked at his mother, then back at Julian. "Because she's not all the way quiet," he said, his voice clear and simple. "The other sounds are too sharp. They're like needles, they bounce off. But the low sounds, the deep ones, they can get in through the back door. Julian stared at him, his mind struggling to process the boy's words. Through the back door. Bone conduction. He'd read about it in the early days, a fringe theory for certain types of hearing loss. But Lily's diagnosis was total nerve deafness. "What do you mean, the back door?" Julian asked, leaning closer. "Her ears are closed," Leo said, pointing to his own ears, "but her head can listen. You just have to know how to knock." Maria Carter looked mortified. "Leo, stop making up stories. I'm so sorry, sir. He has a wild imagination." But Julian wasn't listening to her. He was looking at Leo, at the absolute certainty in the child's eyes. This wasn't imagination. This was something else. Something pure and true that the adult world, with its charts and diagnoses, had missed entirely. "The doctors," Julian murmured, more to himself than to them. "They said it was impossible." "The doctors are wrong," Leo said, with the simple finality of a child stating that the sky is blue. A cold dread, mingled with a sliver of terrifying hope, washed over Julian. For 6 years he had accepted a diagnosis. He had built his entire life, his daughter's entire life, around a single devastating medical fact. What if that fact was a lie? The implications were staggering, a chasm opening at his feet. It meant more than just a misdiagnosis. It meant 6 years. 6 years of silence that might not have been necessary. 6 years of his daughter living in a muffled prison. The thought was so horrific he felt sick. He stood up, his movements stiff. He looked at Maria, whose face was a mask of confusion and fear. He pulled out his checkbook, an instinctive gesture for a man who solved every problem with money. I want to thank you," he stammered, his hand shaking as he tried to write. "For your time. I want to compensate you." Maria's eyes flashed with a fierce, wounded pride. "We don't want your money, Mr. Vance. My son was just being kind. Now, I think you should leave." Julian looked at the check, then back at her proud, tired face. He felt a profound sense of shame. He was trying to transact his way out of a moment that was deeply, terrifyingly human. He slowly tore the check in half. "You're right. I'm sorry," he said. He looked one last time at Leo. "Thank you, Leo?" The boy just nodded. Julian walked out of the apartment and back into the dingy hallway, his mind a maelstrom. He wasn't chasing a ghost anymore. He was hunting a monster, and he had a sickening feeling that the monster wasn't a disease, but a person. Someone had been wrong, terribly, unforgivably wrong, and he was going to find out who. The first call he made was not to Marcus, but to Dr. Eris Thorne, a pediatric neurologist in Zurich known for radical, cutting-edge diagnostics. He was a man who didn't accept impossibilities. Julian didn't care what it cost or what schedules had to be broken. He and Lily would be on a plane by morning. When he told Eleanor, she was aghast. "Zurich, Julian, this is insane. You're flying halfway around the world based on the fantasy of a little boy from the Bronx? You have the merger finalizing next week. The board will think you've lost your mind." "Let them," Julian said, his voice hard as granite. "This is more important. More important than the deal you've worked on for 3 years? What has gotten into you? You're letting this poor woman and her child manipulate you." "They didn't ask for a thing," he shot back. "And whether they're right or wrong, I have to know. For my own peace of mind, Elle. For Lily." He could see the frustration in her eyes, but she relented, falling back into her role as the ever-capable facilitator. "Fine," she sighed. "I'll clear your schedule. I'll make the arrangements. But Julian, please, be prepared for disappointment. I don't want to see you hurt." Her concern felt genuine, and a part of him felt a pang of guilt for his secrecy, for the suspicion that was now a cold knot in his stomach. This was his sister, the woman who had held him up when his world collapsed. But the image of Leo's knowing eyes was stronger than a lifetime of trust. The clinic in Zurich was less a hospital and more a futuristic laboratory, nestled in the Alps. Dr. Thorne was a whip-smart man with eyes that missed nothing. He listened to Julian's story, the park, the boy, the humming, without a flicker of judgment. He ran a battery of tests on Lily using technology Julian had never seen before, scans that mapped every neural pathway in her brain in 3 dimensions, machines that measured infinitesimal responses to sonic vibrations delivered directly through the bone. For 2 days, Julian waited, pacing the floor of his hotel suite, the silence more oppressive than ever. On the 3rd day, Dr. Thorne summoned him to his office. A single sealed envelope lay on the polished mahogany desk between them. A storm was brewing outside, the sky over the mountains a dark, bruised purple. "Mr. Vance," Dr. Thorne began, his voice grave, "I have reviewed all of Lily's previous medical files from her birth until now, and I have the results of our own diagnostics." Julian's heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of his chest. "And?" Dr. Thorne slid the envelope across the desk. "The original diagnosis was incomplete. Her cochlea and auditory nerves are structurally perfectly sound. There is no congenital defect." The words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow against the foundations of Julian's life. Perfectly sound. No defect. "Then why?" Julian whispered, his voice hoarse. "Why can't she hear?" Dr. Thorne leaned forward, his expression grim. "We found trace markers in her system, and significant, though reversible, damage to the delicate hair cells in her inner ear. The damage is not from a birth defect, Mr. Vance. It's consistent with prolonged exposure to a powerful ototoxic agent." "Ototoxic?" "A substance that is poisonous to the ear," the doctor clarified. "Certain antibiotics, diuretics, industrial chemicals, administered regularly in small doses to an infant, it would effectively mimic congenital deafness. It would create a prison of silence around a perfectly healthy child." The room spun, the air grew thin. Julian gripped the arms of his chair to keep from falling. Poison. Someone had poisoned his daughter. For 6 years. Systematically. Deliberately. "Who?" The word was a raw tear in the fabric of the room. "Who would do that?" "The substance we detected is rare," Dr. Thorne said, his voice gentle but firm. "It's not something one simply comes across. It would require specialized knowledge. Access to the child from infancy. The person who did this was not a stranger, Mr. Vance. They were someone very, very close to you." The doctor's words echoed in the sudden violent clap of thunder that shook the building. "Very close to you." Julian's mind raced, shuffling through the faces of nannies, nurses, staff, but a darker, more terrible suspicion began to coalesce, a shape so monstrous he could barely look at it. There was only one person who had been there from the beginning, the one person who managed every aspect of Lily's care, the one person who had always been there to handle everything, Eleanor. The flight back to New York was a journey through hell. Julian sat in the private jet, the hum of the engines a distant drone, the damning medical report a lead weight in his briefcase. Lily slept peacefully in the adjoining suite, oblivious to the earthquake that had just leveled her father's world. Every memory of the past 6 years was now tainted, twisted into a grotesque new shape. Eleanor's constant concern, her gentle reassurances, her efficiency in managing Lily's appointments and specialized care? Was it all a lie? A meticulously crafted performance to conceal an unthinkable evil? The idea was so vile, so contrary to the woman he knew, that his mind recoiled. It had to be a mistake. A nurse, a disgruntled staff member, anyone but her. But Dr. Thorne's words haunted him. Specialized knowledge, access from infancy, someone very close. Eleanor had been a pre-med student before she'd switched to business to help him launch Vance Global. She had the knowledge. She had the access. She had his absolute, unquestioning trust. He landed in New York with a grim purpose. He couldn't confront her. Not yet. He needed proof, something undeniable that would either condemn her or exonerate her. He called Marcus Thorne from the car. "Marcus, I'm reopening the investigation," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I want you to dig into my sister, Eleanor Vance. I want to know everything, financials, communications, her entire life for the past 7 years. Spare no expense, and Marcus, be invisible. If she gets a hint of this, it's over." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Mr. Vance, are you sure?" "I've never been less sure of anything in my life," Julian said. "Just do it." His next stop was not his penthouse, but the Bronx. He knew with a certainty that defied logic that the only people he could trust right now were the struggling single mother and her preternaturally wise son. He found Maria Carter coming home from her second job, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. When she saw him waiting in his car, a flicker of fear crossed her face again. "Mr. Vance," she said, clutching her purse. "I told you. I'm not here to offer you money," he said, getting out of the car. "I'm here to ask for your help." He told her everything, the trip to Zurich, the diagnosis, the poison. He watched her face shift from suspicion to shock, then to a deep, maternal horror. "My God," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "That poor little girl." "They told me the person who did this was close to me," Julian said, the words tasting like ash. "I don't know who to trust." He looked past her toward the entrance of her building where Leo was now standing, having come down to meet his mother. The boy was watching him, his expression unreadable. "Why are you telling me this?" Maria asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Because your son? He saw the truth when no one else could. I don't understand it, but I believe in it. And right now, I think he's the only one who can help Lily." It was a fragile, desperate alliance forged in the dim light of a Bronx street. Maria, after a long moment of hesitation, agreed. She was terrified of his world, of the power and the danger that surrounded him. But her compassion for a wounded child outweighed her fear. The next day, she and Leo came to the penthouse. The contrast was jarring. Leo stood in the center of the cavernous, minimalist living room, looking small and out of place against the backdrop of museum-quality art and floor-to-ceiling windows. Eleanor was conveniently out for the afternoon, finalizing details for the merger. Lily, who had been taught to be wary of strangers, seemed immediately at ease with Leo. He didn't try to force an interaction. He simply sat on the floor with her and her building blocks, humming his low, steady tune. Julian watched them, his heart a tangle of hope and fear. He showed Maria the doctor's report. She read it, tears welling in her eyes. "How can someone be so cruel?" she murmured. "I'm going to find out," Julian vowed. For the next week, Julian lived a double life. By day, he was the focused CEO, playing his part in the final run-up to the merger, sitting in meetings with Eleanor, forcing himself to act normal, to smile, to pretend his world wasn't fracturing under his feet. Every polite question she asked, every concerned glance, felt like a poisoned dart. In the evenings, his penthouse became a secret command center. Marcus's team worked around the clock, digging through layers of encrypted files and shell corporations. And every afternoon, Maria would bring Leo. They would spend hours with Lily. Leo was teaching her, in his own silent, intuitive way, to listen through her bones. He'd have her place her hands on a speaker playing low-frequency bass music. He'd tap rhythms on her shoulders, her back, the top of her head. Slowly, miraculously, something began to shift. Lily started responding more consistently. A tap on the floor from the next room would make her head turn. The deep rumble of the elevator would make her pause. She was waking up, her world slowly filling with the muffled echoes of sound. For the first time in 6 years, Julian felt a spark of genuine hope. He was connecting with his daughter in a way he never had before, united by this strange, secret project. He learned the rhythms Leo used, and he would spend hours just tapping on his daughter's hand, a silent conversation that felt more profound than any words. Then the viper struck. He received a call from a frantic Maria. An agent from Child Protective Services was at her door. An anonymous tip had been filed, accusing her of negligence, of leaving her 7-year-old son unsupervised. It was a baseless, malicious lie, but the threat was terrifyingly real. "They're threatening to take Leo," she sobbed into the phone. Julian's blood ran cold. This wasn't random. The timing was too perfect. Someone knew he was getting close to Maria and Leo. Someone wanted to scare them away, to sever his only lifeline to the truth. His suspicion, which he had been desperately trying to keep at bay, now solidified into a cold, hard certainty. Eleanor. She was the only one who knew about his visits to the Bronx. He had let it slip one evening, trying to explain his distraction. He had seen a flicker of something in her eyes then, something he'd mistaken for concern. He now knew it was the glint of a predator's calculation. "Stay calm, Maria. Don't let them in without a warrant. I'm sending my personal lawyer to you right now. He'll handle this. I won't let them touch your son." He hung up, his hands shaking with a rage so pure and cold it felt like ice in his veins. She had crossed a line. She had targeted a child. She had targeted Leo. This was no longer just about uncovering a past crime. It was an active war. The CPS threat was followed by a more public attack. A sleazy online tabloid published a story, complete with grainy photos of Julian entering Maria's building. The headline was salacious. "Grieving billionaire Julian Vance finds comfort with Bronx cleaner. Is she a gold digger preying on his tragedy?" The article was a masterpiece of insinuation, painting Maria as a manipulative grifter, and Julian as a disturbed man losing his grip, neglecting his disabled daughter for a sordid affair. The leak was clearly internal. The language subtly mirrored Eleanor's own words to him, losing his mind, being manipulated. The board was in an uproar. The merger was on shaky ground. His reputation, so carefully cultivated, was being shredded. He was being backed into a corner, forced to choose between his empire and the two innocent people who were his only allies. The pressure was immense. Eleanor approached him in his office, her face a perfect mask of sympathy. "Julian, this is a nightmare," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I told you this woman was trouble. You have to cut ties with her. Issue a statement. Deny everything. For the good of the company. For Lily's sake." He looked into her eyes, searching for any crack in the facade, any hint of the monster beneath. He saw nothing but sincere, loving concern. The performance was flawless, and it was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. "You're right," he said, his voice a dead calm that unnerved her. "I know what I have to do." He had to end this. Now. That night Marcus called. "I've got it," he said, his voice grim. "It's bad, Julian." He had found the smoking gun, a series of untraceable cash payments made monthly for 6 years to a private nurse named Clara Jennings. Nurse Jennings had been on duty in the maternity ward the night Lily was born. More damningly, Marcus had uncovered encrypted emails between Eleanor and a chemical supply company detailing the purchase of a specific rare autotoxic compound, the same one Dr. Thorne had found in Lily's system. The final piece was a financial record showing that Nurse Jennings had received her last, largest payment just 1 week ago. A bonus, perhaps, for services rendered. Like making an anonymous call to CPS. The truth was laid bare, ugly, and undeniable. It was Eleanor. It had always been Eleanor. Julian felt a profound, hollowing grief, followed by a wave of righteous fury. The woman he had trusted with his life, with his child's life, had betrayed them in the most monstrous way imaginable. The final confrontation couldn't be a quiet affair in his office. It had to be a public execution of her lies. The next day was the final board meeting to sign the merger papers, a deal that would make Vance Global the largest tech conglomerate on the planet. It was Eleanor's magnum opus, the culmination of her life's work, and he was going to burn it to the ground. The boardroom was tense. The press scandal hung heavy in the air. The other board members looked at Julian with a mixture of pity and distrust. Eleanor sat at his right hand, poised and confident, the picture of control. The final documents were placed before him. All he had to do was sign, secure his legacy, secure the empire, and bury the truth forever. "Before I sign," Julian said, his voice ringing through the silent room, "I have a statement to make." Eleanor's smile faltered. She shot him a warning look. He ignored her, his eyes sweeping across the faces of the board members. "For the past 6 years, I have been living a lie. We have all been told that my daughter Lily was born deaf. This is not true." A collective gasp went through the room. Eleanor went pale. "My daughter's hearing was stolen from her," Julian continued, his voice rising with controlled fury. "She was systematically poisoned from the day she was born, with a drug designed to mimic a congenital defect. A crime committed to keep her dependent, to keep me broken and reliant. A crime committed by someone in this very room." He turned his gaze directly on his sister. Her mask of composure finally shattered, her face contorting with panic. "Julian, what are you talking about? You're not well. The stress—" "I have never been more well in my life, Eleanor," he said, his voice dropping to an icy whisper. He slid a folder across the table. It was Marcus's entire investigation. Bank statements, emails, the nurse's sworn affidavit that Marcus had secured an hour earlier. "It's over." Eleanor stared at the folder, her whole body trembling. The board members were in shock, looking back and forth between the siblings. "And this merger," Julian said, picking up the multi-billion-dollar contract, "is a monument to your ambition and your deceit." He ripped the thick document in half, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the stunned silence. "Vance Global is not for sale, and it is no longer your home." He stood up. "Security," he said into his watch. "Escort Ms. Vance from the building. The authorities are on their way." 2 guards entered the room. Eleanor looked at him, her eyes wild with hatred and disbelief. "You're destroying everything. For what? For some street kid and his mother?" "No," Julian said, his voice clear and strong. "I'm destroying your everything, to save my everything." As the guards took her arm, she lunged toward him, a snarl on her face. "You'll be nothing without me. You're weak." "I was," Julian said calmly, as they dragged her, shouting, from the room. "But I'm not any more." He walked out of the boardroom, leaving the chaos and the wreckage of his old life behind, without a backward glance. He had made his choice. He had chosen his daughter. He had chosen his family. The storm that had been brewing in his life finally broke. And as the rain began to fall outside, washing the city clean, Julian Vance felt, for the first time in 6 years, a profound and liberating peace. The months that followed were a quiet reconstruction. The scandal was immense, but Julian faced it head-on. He gave a single brutally honest press conference, laying out Eleanor's crimes and the truth about Lily. He sold off the more aggressive divisions of Vance Global, downsizing the empire into something more manageable, something that didn't consume his soul. His life was no longer about conquering the world. It was about rebuilding his daughters. Eleanor was tried and convicted. The evidence was overwhelming. The nurse, Clara Jennings, testified against her in exchange for a lesser sentence. Eleanor was sentenced to 25 years in prison, her name erased from the company she had tried to steal. She was exiled not just from his life, but from the world she valued above all else. Julian used his fortune to create a foundation for Dr. Thorne's research and established a community center in the Bronx, run by Maria Carter, who had discovered a surprising talent for administration and a deep passion for helping families like her own. He had made sure she and Leo would never have to worry about money again, but more than that, he had made them family. They were a constant, grounding presence in his and Lily's lives. Lily's treatment was slow but steady. With the poison gone, the damaged cells in her ears began to heal. She wore specialized hearing aids that amplified the low-frequency sounds she was now able to perceive. Her world, once a silent film, was slowly transforming into a symphony of muffled rumbles, deep vibrations, and resonant tones. One crisp autumn afternoon, about 6 months after the trial, Julian was in the park with Lily. It was the same park where everything had begun. Leo was with them, the two children having formed an inseparable bond that transcended words. Lily was sitting on a swing, and Julian gave her a gentle push. The chains of the swing made a low, groaning sound. Groan squeak. Groan squeak. Lily's head tilted. She put her hands over her hearing aids, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Da, da," she said. It was the first sound she had ever tried to make. Not a word, but an imitation of the rhythm of the swing. Julian's heart stopped. He knelt in front of her, his eyes filling with tears. "That's right, sweetheart, that's right." He cupped her face in his hands, his gaze full of a love so overwhelming it felt like it could reshape the world. He leaned in close, his lips near her ear, and spoke in a low, clear voice, pitching it to the frequency he knew she could perceive best. "I love you, Lily." She stared at his mouth, then looked into his eyes. A slow, radiant smile spread across her face, a smile of pure, untainted recognition. She didn't repeat the words back. She didn't have to. In that moment, in the quiet of the park surrounded by the new family he had chosen, Julian Vance heard everything he ever needed to hear. His kingdom was smaller now, but for the first time in his life, it was whole. The silence had finally been broken, replaced by the beautiful, perfect sound of his daughter's smile.